Hello everybody, this is Dean from Motion Media, and today we're going to take a look at creating liquid metal similar to the Terminator effect. I had to do a project recently where I needed liquid metal to pour into some tight grooves, and so we're going to take a look at how to set that up. So first thing we're going to do is create our particle system and a blob mesh. So I'm going to use particle flow, and we're just going to create a little particle flow here in the center. Somehow I got that exactly at 0, 0, huh? That does not seem right. Amazing. Okay, so I looked for some of this online. I'm going to turn up so I can see all the particles in the viewport here, and I just couldn't find anything that I'm just doing some random numbers here. I couldn't find anything online that really showed me exactly how to do this effect, so that's what prompted me to do this. It's fairly simple, straightforward, looks really good, but again, I couldn't find a really easy way to do it, so this is what I came up with. So here's my particle flow, and next we're going to make a compound object blob mesh. I'm going to make it out to the side here. Just makes a little round guy here, and then I am going to go to my modify panel. I'm going to then, with the blobby mesh selected, I'm going to say pick, and I'm going to pick my particle system, and you can see now the particle system is using the blob mesh. So I'm going to move my particle system up a little bit. Alright. Alright, so now you can see at this point it is obviously emitting our blobby mesh. So let's go in and just make some changes here roughly. So we're going to do this over 200 frames. I'm going to leave the amount at 200, pardon me. We're going to leave that. We will leave this for a moment. Rotation we're going to leave. The cube is what we're going to use. We'll use a little randomness to the scale, even though we don't see the cube. And we'll make sure this is geometry. And then we're going to tweak these as we go. Alright, that was wrong. Let's turn that back to ticks, so we don't want to see the cubes. I see. Got it. So the ticks show us an approximation of where the tubes are, and then we get to see the blobby mesh. Now, at this point, you can tell this does not look like liquid metal, obviously. The key to using particle systems in blobby mesh is to keep the particles close together, and that way they form the kind of water or liquid look. So if I go back up here, the easiest way to get us on track is to change where the particles are emitted from volume to pivot. This is going to just right out of the gate force all the particles to be close together. And you can see already we have a pretty decent looking liquid metal. Okay? Actually, kind of looks disgusting at the moment. But we're well on track. If we take, and just to kind of show what I was saying a moment ago, if we go to speed here, and we turn up this divergence and let it update here, you can see what happens. Now we're really getting a cool water look. Okay, and what's happening is we're forcing those particles to go away from each other, and they're trying to stay when they're close enough, according to their size, you can see they try to stay connected, and that's what gives you the really cool pouring liquid look. Alright, so for the moment I'm going to keep this tightly controlled and turn that down, and then if we want to make this a little smaller here, Yeah, it's too small. Oh, now it's too big. Alright. So let's try 0.02. Nope. 0.04. Alright, so that's where we're at. Let's take that off for a moment. Okay, so 0.03. Okay, that's good. Now let's turn our scale back on. This just gives us some variation. And you'll see when I turn this, okay? Just makes it a little unique. And then if we add just a touch of divergence, kind of breaks up the water there. So now we're looking pretty good. Can also change this like 0.02. You know, actually I'm going to change my units real quick just so that it's a little easier to follow along. I'm at, let's go to inches. Okay, so now we're just at generic units. This will just make it a bit easier to look at these numbers. Okay. A little more variation there. Okay. Now, I've learned over the years that when it comes to particle flow and collision objects, it's always kind of an average. It's not ultra accurate. And so what I do is I've learned to set up my particle simulation, get that looking correct, and then I build my piece of geometry around that solution as opposed to the other way. So what we need to do first is build our little piece that's going to have a groove in it. So I'm just going to use a standard plane. I'm going to also make sure it's in the center. And I'm just going to make it square. Turn off these grids for a moment. Okay, so I want this metal to flow through a groove. So I'm going to add an edit poly. I'm going to select the center line, and then I'm going to chamfer it and create a little gap. Okay, and then I'm going to put an extra segment in there. Actually, you know what? Let's put in 2. So I just undid that. Let's oops. Let's make the gap here, and then let's add 2. Let's make it easier. Go to vertices and select these 2, and then make a little bit of a groove here. Okay. Now I have found that it's I'm going to just remove my smoothing groups here so it's easier to see. Oops, clear all. Okay, let's remove the grid here. Let's put this to shaded. Okay. So let's just make this a little easier to see. Okay, so at the moment, obviously, just pours right through the gap. So we need to create something so that particle flow can see this collision piece of geometry. We're going to do that with a deflector, a U omni deflector. So I'm going to create it out here to the side. And then we simply pick the object that we want to deflect. We're going to turn this, well, we'll leave it right there. Actually, we'll leave everything just the way that it is. So let's go back to particle flow. Let's add collision. Drop it down here at the bottom. And then add our U omni deflect. And now you can see it's in the window showing that we've chosen it. We're going to leave all the defaults the way that they are and see what happens. Okay. So now what's happening is it is being deflected, but it's also being bounced directly up. So I'm going to turn my bounce down to 1. Okay. Now you can see it's just kind of floating there. Now there's a few choices I have here. I can apply some wind or gravity and try to force it down that channel, or I can just slightly rotate this, which again, in this case, works for me. Okay, now you can see it's bouncing off the scene here, which is fine. We can do a couple of other things to try to help it follow that centerpiece. We can try turning off the initial velocity. Yeah, helped a little, not much. Could turn off the bounce all the way, but I don't really want to do that. But you see now it's sliding better. I think I'd rather do that with some gravity. So let's do that. Let's turn our bounce back to 1. And let's go to forces. Excuse me, forces, and add gravity. Okay. Put a gravity here. We'll leave the defaults. We'll go back to particle view. Let's grab a force, put it here, and then add our gravity. Okay. Now, obviously, we all know gravity comes in at 1. It's usually pretty strong. You can try some different settings here. So you just want to keep a little bit of bounce in there. So you can see we get this look as though it's running through the groove. Okay. And it's also breaking apart, which is cool. Now, at this point, we have a pretty cool looking particle thing. Let's just go a few steps further here. Make a camera and just kind of get us set up here just a little bit. And again, this is kind of an easier one, but I think it shows the setup. And we're going to just refine it a bit here and add a couple of more layers of motion to it. So I'm creating a dummy. I'm going to align this dummy to the particle system. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in the motion panel, I'm going to select the rotation, and I'm going to change the controller to a rotate, a noise rotate. And you can see what that does is it makes the dummy randomly rotate all over the place. Now I want to restrict this to just one axis, so I'm going to turn off these two. Oh, wrong one. It looks like X. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is I'm going to turn off fractal, and oops, and I'm going to turn down the frequency. And what I want to do is I want to kind of simulate just a little bit of rotation on the emitter so that it kind of throws this liquid type thing around just a little bit. Okay, so let's link now our particle system to the dummy. Okay, and now, and you know, so let's just make that a little bit more extreme. Okay, now it kind of throws liquid all through there. Now it looks a lot more like liquid metal. Alright, that's kind of cool. Alright, now at this point let me add okay, just turn off whatever. Nope. So I'm just going to load my Vray settings really quickly. And I'm going to shut off this extra map here. I'm going to create just a plain light for a moment just so we can see what's going on. Alright. So I'm going through this really quickly just so we can see. Let's just see what we get. Alright, so a few problems here. So number one, we see the cubes, so that's no good. So what we need to do is we need to make a material that's invisible. So I'm going to make this black, no shininess, and we'll call it invis. Alright, let's bring up our particle flow. I'm going to do material static. Drop it right under here. This way it will apply that material throughout the entire simulation. Now let's re-render again. Okay, so now we don't see the cubes anymore. That's good. Okay. So now if we select our blobby mesh and we assign just a chrome V-Ray material, so we'll just start with a normal V-Ray. We'll turn up the reflection like 180-ish, maybe 200, 216. And we'll turn this down a little bit to 2. And I'm going to apply that to the blobby mesh. Okay. Now we can look again. Alright, so now we've got chrome metal. Now the reason why this is so stark is because, you know, the only thing in our environment at the moment is a light and then black and then this blue piece. So that's why it looks like this at the moment. There's not much to reflect. I'll go into fixing that here in a moment. So now that we can kind of see what the render is doing and we're in our, I'm actually with the blobby mesh selected, we want to do a few things. Number one, I'm going to go to my particle system. I'm going to really turn up the amount of particles in it. We'll go back to 0 here. Alright. So what that did was it increased how many particles are emitting, right? Which gives us a more connected feel. Now, you know, to get this back to breaking up, obviously we have to go back here to our shape and maybe cut this down to 4. Okay, see what happened there? We got everything to still stay connected, but at the same time give us a little bit more of that liquid metal feel. Now, right now we're using really high numbers so that this will move quickly, and what I mean by that is the higher this number is, the more low res, if you will, it's going to be in the viewport. And same here. I found that in my sequence I had to really go low, like 0.6, and you'll see the difference here. To get a really smooth, you can see what we've got now. We've got a nice smooth metal look, you know, and the lower you make this number, the more resed up this is going to be. And same thing in the viewport. I can kind of get a feel for what that is going to look like if I do it here. If I do 0.6 in the viewport, give it a second here, you can see it in the viewport. Now obviously this is going to wash away our ability to really do any scrubbing of the timeline. You can see here if we just move it one thing, but it just gives you a visual representation of what to expect. So I'm going to move this back to 6 for a moment. We're going to minimize this, and now let's just take a moment. This is just going to be our collision object. It's not going to be what we render. We want to make a much higher res piece that has a lot more detail in it. So what I want to do is I'm going to build that piece. So I'm going to just shift my viewport around so I can see. See if I can get it right there. It's pretty close. Give me a little trouble. Doesn't want to be exact. Whatever. Okay, pretty close. And now what we're going to do is we're going to build the actual rendered piece. So I'm going to say clone, and I'm going to call this a copy. And I'm actually going to go back and grab this first plane and hide it. So I don't want to see it at render time. Now what I'm going to do is, using what I've already done, I'm going to actually I'm going to use the pivot point of the plane, since we're at an angle, so that I move everything in relation to the plane. I don't want everything getting weird. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change this a little bit so that I can, and why don't we also, sorry, let's grab the blobby mesh and let's make it a little more high res in the viewport. Okay, and this will make it a little bit easier to model around. So, like I said at the beginning, I've found it's easier to set up your solution, get your particle system working, and then model the piece that it's going to flow in or around. And this way, you're going to have a much more, it's going to look like it really fits exactly inside the piece that you're going to render. So I'm going to put a little mesh smooth on here and just see where we're at. Okay, so you can see we need a little work here. We're in the right direction. Pardon me. And so we're going to go back into Edit Poly, turn off the ability to show us that. Let's we still have our edges selected before. So with that selected, let's chamfer them again. Okay, now we're getting a nice groove here. Actually, let's do alright, let's go back to here. Let's go to chamfer. Okay, so we want, let's turn this down. We would like a pretty tight one. So we're going to do something like that and like that. So we get a nice, really defined edge here. We're going to say OK. Now we can go back here to our vertices, and if we need to, let's turn that off. I like to go back and forth between seeing the mesh smooth on and off. Okay, that looks good. So let's go in the center here. Let's grab the bottom ones. Let's expand that out. Let's go up here and really snug it in there. Okay. Alright, now it's going to look as though, let's go back here, let's add a little mesh smooth. Let's add actually another, let's make this, we're just going to call it hood real quick. And we'll give ourselves a little different feel here. Reflection wise, so we don't have two chrome objects. Let's do a quick render. Alright, so this looks, pretty junky at the moment, but you can see that's our light source that's being reflected. We need to do a lot more work on lighting to make this pretty, but you can see looks pretty cool in the groove there. So, let's just pretty this up a little bit just so you can see what that might look like. And what's cool too, I'm gonna if I grab the blobby mesh, let's take it back down to or pull it back up to 6 in the viewport here, and you can see too, looks like it's just made for that groove. Looks like it's fitting in there perfect. Awesome. Okay, when it gets to this point, I think it's easy to use, or easier to use, Vray's real-time renderer. And I'm just going to do little setting changes there to Vray RT. This is probably, I've talked about this before, this is perhaps my favorite new thing for, Vray, Max, whatever. Having the ability to see stuff rendered in your viewport is awesome. Alright, so, and I'm going quickly, but at the same time setting up something here that will look halfway decent. With that light selected, I'm going to actually throw in a Vray HDR. And we're going to drag and drop this into the material editor and say instance. And we're going to add just a quick HDR. Okay, so you see we already see a little reflection. As many of you know, when you use these in this kind of linear setup, you're going to have to gun the reflections a bit. So you see we've got a bit more, and depending on how bright that you want that to be, you can change that around. The particles, unfortunately, I've noticed do not update. You have to hit render to get them to update there. And looks like maybe our reflection's too hot there. Looks like something's gone goofy. Oh, I know what's wrong. Thought I had this locked. It's alright. So this is a good thing to notice here. You want to lock these two. That way, if you select a different viewport, it only still renders this one. So my point earlier was you don't get the update to the particles. And I'm sorry, I didn't want to put in a I'm all over the place here. This is wrong. I don't want an HDR. I want a gradient ramp for a second. We'll do the HDR in a minute through a different light. It's my bad. Instance. So what we're doing is we're applying this gradient ramp to the light source. It's in box mode to kind of hug the corners. You can see what it's doing to the reflection, but we want the opposite. So let's take this to black. Let's do this to white. And you get this nice fall off on your lighting here. Now at the moment our hood is fairly low res. Let's really crank it up in the render. Okay, now Vray RT works in the viewport, so if I want to see those iterations, I got to turn it up here. And you can see we already get a much better look. Okay, now just for fun, I'm going to take this light and copy it behind, rotate it around, find hopefully a sweet spot there. And you can see also we have our particle system is low res. So if we hit that blobby mesh, turn it up in the viewport here just a little bit, maybe just a 2, we can see we're getting a little, about 1, getting a little more roundness there, and that kind of helps us see where that light is reflecting. Alright, so let's add, I was just saying we need to add one more light source, so let's do a V-Ray dome. I'm going to put it in here, I'm going to make it invisible, and now this time we're going to take that HDR we set up and we're going to drop it in here. Okay. Alright, there we go. Now we've got this cool side. Now, this doesn't really work for us because it's outside. So I have all kinds of HDRs. I'm just going to stick in one of an interior. And then again, this is just awesome, but being able to rotate this around in my viewport until I find a sweet spot is awesome. Perhaps because we're looking down, maybe we want to rotate this 90 degrees, maybe in our hood we want to blur it just a little bit, blur the reflections so we don't see it exactly correct. Go back to 0 here, and I'm literally just hunting and pecking. That's kind of cool. So I'm rotating this until I find kind of a cool spot in the reflection. I don't want it to be too overpowering. And then we can go back and make some adjustments to our light here. Perhaps this shouldn't be so harsh. And again, because I can see it in the viewport, what a great time saver. Okay, just a little bit of Just get a little bit of contrast going there, so it looks like it might be part of the image that we're using to reflect. And again, maybe we can turn it up. Oh, you know what? Sorry. Make sure you have the right light source selected. Oops. That's always helpful. So we can go turn this one up. We can put this, I usually like to have this centered, just so I know where it is. Okay, and let's go back here. Maybe this could be turned up a little bit. Yep. Alright, you know, and maybe this light should come all the way back so we can get rid of this. You know, something like that. And maybe even it should be rotated differently. Maybe longer. And I like that. Go back here. You know, I'm going to stick right in here. I like that. Okay, so now we've got, you know, really decent kind of setup here, both lighting wise, look wise. You know, we've got all of our materials set up. We've got a couple of good looking lights set up here. Let's kill this and let's actually run it down just a little bit further here. Okay, really cool solution. And let's hit, oops, I don't want to do that. Let's kill this and let's do a regular render. So I hope you can see from scratch, you know, kind of the process here of creating or simulating a liquid metal terminator kind of particle system setup for 3ds Max. We didn't use any extra plugins or anything, just the straight stuff other than Vray. But we've got a really convincing, easy to use, easy to set up particle system that we can use now, and I can kind of repeat this setup for different, you know, if I wanted to make a curved groove, we could do that. Just use the same setup, just you know, remodel our pieces, very easy, or add a bend to them. But you know, this looks really good. If you want to go further, obviously, you can do a few things, but you know, on the blobby mesh in our render, we could go back down to 3. We could also, you know, as it pertains to Vray, you know, go in and turn up our settings for a more high-res looking render. So if I hit render now, this is going to obviously take a little bit longer because we just turned up the resolution a great deal on the blobby mesh, and then we also turned up the settings in our Vray renderer to reflect more of a production level render. And you can see this is taking a little bit longer. I should mention that I have a fairly new HP workstation that I bought through Motion Media. Great price, by the way. And it's a 16 core with 32 gigs of RAM, and it's a fantastic, fantastic machine. So you may have, if you have a slower machine, you may want to be wary. You can see, again, with all this firepower, this particular setup takes a while to render. So you should always be careful about making those adjustments to your particle systems on a frame out here in the center. You should probably always be on 0. I can be a little lazy because this machine is pretty hardcore. So you can see this is cleaning up a lot of our reflections here, making them a bit smoother, and giving us a lot more topology on the particle system itself. Got a nice little kind of blurred reflection there in our hood paint, and that's it. So I hope this was helpful, and we will talk to you guys again soon.